Jane Velez-Mitchell, extraordinary trial coverage in Utah. DXE co-founder Wayne Hsiung and DXE member Paul Picklesimer could spend 11 years in prison for rescuing two piglets from a massive pig factory farm in Utah. Wayne Hsiung is representing himself. He was on the stand today asking himself questions and answering them in what I can only describe as an absolutely brilliant legal tour de force. We want to go straight out to Elmira Tanner. She is with Direct Action Everywhere, DXE, near the courthouse in Utah. Bring us up to date with everything that happened. So extraordinary. Elmira.
Hi, Jane. Thanks so much. I'm here outside the Electric Theater, which is actually a couple blocks from court. And at this theater is where most of the people are watching the trial, like a movie, because we're not allowed to be in the courtroom. And yet today was really incredible. Wayne started with his opening statement, and everything that he was saying, the prosecutor was objecting to and the judge was sustaining. So it was really hard for him to get his words out. But as it progressed and as he then took the stand to be his own witness and, question himself, I think things started to really pick up. Two interesting things was that the judge started overruling a lot of the objections that the prosecution was throwing out there. They were able to get some photo and video evidence in. And in what I think is really powerful, everybody in the courtroom has started referring to the piglets as Lily and Lizzie. So our side has always called them Lily and Lizzie, but before the judge and the prosecutor had been calling them items and things. And now the judge is like, wait, is this Lily or is this Lizzie? And I think that's just showing that people are really starting to understand that these are two individuals and not just like pieces of property that someone stole from someone's house. So that's kind of where we are. Wayne is not done with his testimony yet. And I think it's gonna be a long day today is my sense of how things are going to go.
I want to ask a couple of questions of you, and one of them is that they can't show what's being called the Death Star video, and I thought it was really a stumble for the prosecution to say, is this from the Death Star video, which makes it sound like this what it is, an extraordinary, horrifying 360-degree tour of this horrifying place that is so horrifying. The judge ruled if the jury saw it, they would be inclined to make an emotional decision. So the Death Star video is not being shown. But there are other videos of Lily and Lizzie, the two piglets, that are technically worth less than $50 each, removed by Wayne and Paul and some of the others who were no longer charged. That video is able to be shown. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I'm not an attorney, so the attorneys can correct me if I get something wrong, but essentially that the judge has ruled that there is no discussion, no evidence to be provided about the general conditions on the farm, animal welfare issues at Smithfield, kind of the entire layout. And that's what the Death Star video gets at, because it wasn't just Lily and Lizzie that were suffering. Like all of these animals, if anyone's ever seen that video or seen any pig farm, knows like everyone is suffering in there. So that is why the Death Star video is not being allowed. But the judge did say that specific evidence about Lily and Lizzie's condition is allowed because it goes to the issue of value. So in a theft case, you have to, quote unquote, steal something of value. And it's kind of difficult to talk about this because I know as animal rights activists, we don't think of animals as property. We don't think of them as having monetary value. But in this case, it actually does matter because the prosecution is arguing that these things had monetary value. And our side is arguing that no, absolutely they did not. And in order to make that argument, they have to be able to show the conditions of those specific piglets. So what we're seeing in court is very, very short snippets that are only showing Lily and Lizzie. No, I guess, talking from the video, because when this video was shot, they were in the farm and, they're saying, oh my gosh, look at her, all of that. So that's not being allowed. The videos are being shown on mute. And right now they're arguing quite intently, unfortunately not in front of the jury. The jury was left, but right before we went for lunch, they were arguing very intently on whether or not they could show a photo and video of Lizzie's mother, because Lizzie's mother had nipples that were so shredded and bleeding that Lizzie was not able to get milk from her and is therefore starving to death. So the prosecution is arguing, they said themselves, this video is so graphic that it would provide it would provide too much prejudicial evidence compared to the probative evidence that it would provide, and it would be chilling for the jury to see. Our side is arguing that the condition of Lizzie's mother is actually very, very relevant to Lizzie's condition, because when you're a baby, if your mother is not producing milk, like, you are going to die if you don't have another food source. And so I don't know what exactly the final ruling was. I think that they're still going back and forth on this. For sure, Wayne will be allowed to describe that, but I think anybody who has nipples, if you see that video and you see that footage, like, you can imagine how painful this shredded, bloody nipple is, and then to have piglets trying desperately to nurse on that, like, there's a reason the prosecution absolutely does not want this video in there. So that's where they're kind of hung up on. But again, it goes to, is this video, is this photo specifically about the piglets in question? As soon as it crosses the line into general animal welfare, general animal cruelty, it's going to get shut down and not be allowed to be shown or even discussed in front of the jury.
All right, thank you for that. If you could stand by for a second, we've got an incredible team. We've got Gwenna Hunter, founder of Vegans for Black Lives Matter, Nathan Semmel, who's a prominent attorney in New York, Lisa Bloom, who is a famed attorney. We used to work together on Court TV, Simone Reyes, a well-known animal activist, and Karen LaCava, an avid trial watcher. So I want to go to you, Nathan. What did you make of this extraordinary situation where Wayne is defending himself, so he's on the witness stand and he's asking himself questions? Well, then what did you do? Well, what I did was, I've never really seen anything quite so extraordinary in a courtroom.
No, it's unusual. I guess you could say it breaks the flow a little bit, but Wayne has an incredible mind, and he's a gifted orator, and he's probably the exception to the rule, and he's able to do it. And I think it brings out a little bit of, humanity in him. I think he's doing just an amazing job. I think, Lisa will tell you, generally speaking, we sort of cringe the notion of our clients testifying out of fear that they're going to say something that incriminates them or makes them look, short-tempered. But Wayne he's even keeled, he's calm, he's respectful, he knows the rules. I think he's doing a great job.
All right. So we are live with coverage of this absolutely extraordinary trial. And I want to go to Lisa Bloom. Lisa, you mentioned that the door was open to show the infamous Death Star video that the prosecution actually referred to today, which I thought was a blunder. They said, well, is this from the Death Star video? Now, if I'm a juror, I'm thinking, what on earth is that?
Yes, and I bet you anything that the jurors during their deliberations ask to see the video, because that's the most normal and logical thing. Gee, everybody in this trial has been talking about a video. Can we please see it? And it's just outrageous and massive bias that this video is not coming into evidence. I just makes me cringe when I hear the reports that the judge says, oh, well, it would be so prejudicial. It would offend the sensibilities of the jury. In murder cases, juries see bloody pictures of the crime scene. They see autopsy photos and videos. Jurors are grown-ups. They can handle it. And shielding them from the real facts of what was going on in that disgusting torture chamber that they call a factory farm is just shielding them from the truth. And it's offensive. And I want to say one last thing. I am delighted that everybody's calling them Lizzie and Lily. The language that you use in a courtroom is so important, and making them understand that these are individuals is just really important. So I love that at least both sides are now calling them by their names.
Now, I want to show some of the photos that we've just gotten. I don't want to gross anybody out, but the point is that what's happening inside that factory farm is so awful that the judge has said if the jurors see it, they're going to be so freaked out, they're going to make an emotional decision. So I'm going to just show you snippets for 1 second, and it'll give you an idea of why they are so afraid. Look at this shot. There's one of the piglets that Paul is accused and Wayne are accused of taking out, stealing. And you can see that her face is covered, her snout is covered in blood. It's fuzzy, but take my word for it. It's covered in blood. Here's a particularly gross one, but this is the kind of thing they don't want the jury to see. Look at that. That's a mother pig and some dead, disgusting babies and feces. Here's another one. And this is very important to the trial because this is looks like a dead adult pig surrounded by dead baby pigs. Okay. So I know, Gwenna Hunter, that you are studying this trial. Again, Wayne is accused of taking out 2 piglets. I believe this is one of them who were injured, according to his testimony, very, very sick. And they did take the piglets to a veterinarian after removing them. I want to ask you, Gwenna, what was your reaction to Wayne, by hook or by crook, getting the condition of these 2 pigs who were named Lily and Lizzie out before the jury, with every time, it's like almost every sentence, an objection from the prosecution?
I think it's an outstanding strategy, because even if something gets stricken from the record, it can't get stricken from somebody's consciousness and mind. So I know, I'm like, I mean, he could barely get a sentence out. The prosecution just kept, and it kept being sustained for the most part. It seemed like about 90% of it was being sustained. One thing that he did that I thought was amazing, he talked about how American GIs saved his family's life. Then he talked about how he was bullied and how he had to wear his sister's clothes and how he was overweight. And they kept, objecting, but it was getting like, you heard the story. And these are things I've never known about him. So it hit my heart. I never knew any of these things about him. So it painted a picture of a really compassionate, kind-hearted person. So it's like, okay, if you're thinking like you want to convict this guy, you have to think about his story. And he talked about animals, dogs being slaughtered in China. Like he laid the groundwork to really humanize himself and to me, in my opinion, remove the thought of him being a criminal.
All right, Karen Cava, you are a trial watcher. You're joining us as kind of like, oh, you're an everyday citizen watching this. You are, full disclosure, everybody here is an animal lover, but that holds true for most Americans too. What was your reaction watching this?
I am so impressed with Wayne. I feel like he's even brought the judge around a little bit. The first few days, the judge seemed so biased. And today, this morning watching, I felt like the judge was coming around a little bit. And even though there was still some bias, I felt I definitely see that he is making an impact. And I love the fact that the judge is using Lizzie also, using the pigs' names also, which is the piglets, I should say. I really would love to know if the jurists are asking to see the video. I wonder, will we ever find out? I'm not an attorney, so I don't know. Are all the questions revealed or just the ones that they're allowed to answer?
Simone Reyes, you are a well-known animal rescuer. You, on a daily basis, rescue animals. The essential argument here is that Wayne is saying we rescued these animals. We didn't steal them. And he also makes the point that they have no value to the company, even though technically they're worth less than $44, because there are so many dead pigs that are discarded because they're low weight or they just didn't make it through this grueling process. And there is a picture of all those dead pigs in dumpsters. Do you think he's effectively made the case that he did not steal anything of value from the company, that the company considered valuable, even though he considered these piglets priceless?
I think he's doing an exceptional job, but boy, is he getting hammered. The word dumpster seems to be a trigger word for the state. The judge keeps saying, no, I'm not going to tell you again. Don't use that. Don't reference the dumpster. Keeps coming up. Because what does that show? It shows that these animals are useless, right? Unless that they can bring in money. I also thought it was a beautiful and pivotal moment when the state and the judge kept saying, to Wayne, you keep using the word we. You have to be more specific. Who are you talking about when we went in and saw the conditions? When we were, concerned about the lives of these pigs? When we were, who's we? And instead of just naming everybody, he was like, everybody who loves animals, everybody who cares. And I was like, wow, that just opened it up into, this is not just about the individuals that, we're watching here. This is about everybody who cares about an animal that is a sentient being and that can feel pain.
So let me ask you, Lisa Bloom, you've covered many famous trials. We've both been involved in some of the biggest cases as reporters, anchors, TV hosts. Sometimes, well, if it's a celebrity trial, it's going to be a big trial going down in history. But sometimes those trials don't seem that significant and they become. Where is this going to end up in history? Because this is now crossed over. It was like an open and shut case that now is, wait a second, the company didn't value these animals. There's thousands of them in dumpsters outside. So they took these animals who they've documented were sick and they videotaped everything, and you're not allowed to see the videotape, and we're going to fight you tooth and nail to even see tiny little snippets of video of these two animals who were rescued. Do you think he's flipped the equation, or are we just singing Kumbaya because we want to see, let's be honest, we don't think it's a crime?
I think this is an epic, historic trial, Jane. And I think Wayne and Paul are heroes. And I don't use that word lightly. Heroes are people who put their own personal safety at risk to rescue someone else. And that's what they've done. They are facing 10 years in prison for going in and documenting horrific conditions that are so awful, the judge doesn't think the jury should see it because it would be so upsetting to them. Yes, it's very upsetting. That's why we need change. That's why people like Wayne and Paul are heroes, and people like Simone who rescue animals. And God bless you, Simone, for the work that you do. And people need to see it so that we can have change. And when they see little baby piglets, baby animals who are sick and dying, and they take them in their arms and they take them to a veterinarian to rescue them, they are heroes. And I think it's so important that the world hears about this case and the way that Wayne is conducting himself. He's not availing himself of every legal technicality, like saying, I'm not going to testify, just let the prosecution prove their case, which would be standard criminal defense lawyering 101. Instead, he's taking the stand. He's speaking out. He's asking himself questions. He's trying to get in important evidence. Let them object. Let those objections get sustained. I think the jury is going to see what's going on. And what's going on is the truth is being kept from them. And the state is trying to vilify Wayne and Paul, who are heroes, who are trying to rescue animals. And it's brilliant that he said, everybody who loves animals, that's the we. Because just as you said, Jane, most people consider themselves lovers of animals, whether they're vegan, whether they're carnivores, whatever, they consider themselves animal lovers. And so he's trying to include the jurors with him, trying to bond with them, trying to connect with them. And it's just outstanding communication on his part.
Yeah, and we want to get a sense of what's happening outside court. So we're going to play this little snippet, then we'll go to you, Elmira. You are in Utah. You had been for the past couple of days of our coverage right in front of the courthouse, but authorities said you weren't allowed to be there anymore. Let's take a look at this from St. George News. It's just a little snippet of one of their reports, and then we'll ask you about it.
Residents might see more than 100 people gathered outside. Inside, a trial that is making national news is taking place, even when it isn't getting much notice from local residents. But those gathered in support of defendants accused of stealing 2 piglets from a Milford farming facility see the case as a landmark determination of animal rights. Mostly representatives from the group Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE, just about all are from younger generations and not from the St. George area. Salt Lake City resident Amy Muellerup said she became acquainted with the case by her brother, who previously worked at the farm.
One of my first impressions of this group was my brother comes to the dinner table one day and says, "Can you believe those crazy vegans? They stole one of our pigs."
Sure.
And this is kind of a full circle event for me. Coming back and seeing all these people again, bringing support to Wayne and Paul.
A Salt Lake City woman named Autumn brought her pig Cuzzy, alternating him between a leash and a baby stroller. She said she was there for her animal companion.
Well, this is my companion animal, just like for some people, dogs, cats are their companion animals.
So there were some people from the area who, along with the protesters, Elmira, seemed like they were very supportive.
Yeah, actually, we've been in St. George now since Sunday, and I've been really impressed with how supportive the community has been. I think it's worth remembering that this is not the county that the action took place in, and it's not the county where the trial was supposed to be. The trial was moved to this county specifically because of bias from the jury pool that the judge thought was basically going to make it impossible to create an unfair jury. So we're actually not right in the heart of Smithfield land, which is much better for kind of everyone here, and of course much better for the jury. We've been doing kind of public outreach events every day. We're just around. The people we've been talking to know about the case. They seem quite well informed. They seem to have, really be thinking about it. Lots of honks. I haven't had any bad experiences with people here, which is great. And I think that the local news has been covering us very fairly and accurately, and coming out to everything and sharing the footage from inside trial with other people. Whoops, my headphones are falling out. So yeah, I think things are going really well here. We're very restricted in what we can do in terms of, we can't go inside the courtroom unless we're one of those 10. We can't make any chanting noises or protest noises or anything like that in front of the courthouse. So we're mostly here. I'm actually at the Electric Theater right now, which is where we've been watching it. And because trial's about to start in about 20 minutes, people are starting to gather. And when lunch break's over, we'll all go back inside. And I would say we've hit over 100 people here now to support. And I'm hearing from people who are messaging me that they've been following the trial online, and they're feeling so inspired that they're hopping in their cars and driving to St. George. So I think our numbers are growing as people gain more interest in this case.
Wow. Thank you so much. Elmira Tanner out there, direct action everywhere. You're the head person there now that Wayne has moved on and is obviously dealing with this trial. So Nathan, let me ask you, the whole point is they were charged with stealing. Do you think watching this, and thank you for looking right into the camera eye, I appreciate it. Thank you for giving us an outline of where that line gets drawn, whether it's theft or not theft. Whereas if Wayne proves that these piglets, that the 2 piglets they took had no value to the company because they were underweight, they were sick, they wouldn't become meat pigs and they would be discarded in a dumpster. He pretty much made that case despite all the objections. Then if you're stealing something that has 0 value, is it still theft, or would it on a legal level still be theft?
Some value has to be established. But I think an expert will probably testify as to not just what the market value for a standard piglet would be. I mean, we've heard about $42, but what the market is for a buyer. And that's why, amongst many other things, the conditions of the pigs is so important, because Wayne is showing, is testifying to, and I think an expert will also say, a veterinarian expert will say, that there's no market for a pig in the condition that Wayne found these pigs in. So I think if you're able to establish there's no value, then there's no theft because value is required. But there's also, we can't lose sight of the burglary charge, which is the more serious charge of the 2. And that's that there was an intent to enter to commit a crime therein, which in this case would be a larceny. And I think Wayne is focusing in, and rightfully so, on what his reasoning was for going into the farm that day, which was not to steal, not to necessarily rescue, but to go in and document and to investigate something that they had good faith reason to do, and that they took steps in advance. This wasn't just a last second decision. They'd taken steps to notify law enforcement across the country. They've contacted buyers to alert them to what was going on at this facility, and nothing was done. So that's why they did this. They didn't do it for the purpose of stealing, and I think he's doing a very good job establishing that. I just want to say one other thing. I think one other thing that this case is going to be remembered for is the exposing of the government's connection to big agriculture, and the steps that have been the efforts that have been taken to hide it from the public. I mean, a trial is supposed to be, as particularly from the prosecution standpoint, is supposed to be about getting to the truth, and they have done everything but try to, show the public the truth in this case. They started out by painting this sort of, Walt Whitman image during their opening statement about, highways and open fields, and trying to, paint this beautiful picture. And it's greenwashing. It's no different than Smithfield, the way they advertise. And then when there's any sort of pushback by the defense, suddenly they don't want the jury to see this big picture. They don't want the scene set. They want to hyper focus on just the elements of the crime, but they don't want the jury to know the big picture. And that is not the job of the prosecution. The job of the prosecution is supposed to be justice, seeking justice. It's not supposed to be about getting a conviction. And I think everything that we've seen has just, been an effort to, to cozy up to big agriculture and hide the truth of what was really going on in the farm. And that all of that goes to, Wayne's intent to enter that premises. So I think he's doing a great job. And I think, the defenses are being established.
To that point, Nathan, the FBI was on, and there was a cross-examine, very short, let me show you, 24 seconds, where Wayne says, have you ever had all these FBI agents spending so much time and going around trying to find two piglets worth less than $100?
The question pending is, are you aware of a case involving property theft, where the theft at issue involved less than $100 and had multiple FBI agents involved? I'm just asking for your awareness.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because again, on one hand, of the number of cases I've worked, I think for specifically for theft, I don't think any of the less than 5 cases that I've worked have had a value less than that.
Okay, so as a typical juror, Karen, you are watching this not as an expert. You're a chef and a caterer. You're in the jury box. What are you making of all this?
And a realtor.
Oh, yes, so you're also a realtor. Yeah, I apologize. Yes.
No, that's okay. I feel like they are going after them not just to prosecute, but to make them, I'm having a moment here, to make an issue of this particular, what they're doing, like thinking of them as terrorists versus people rescuing animals that are in need. It's very interesting. Who would send out here, the FBI, you see so many felonies out here and you don't see the FBI looking into it. It's just overblown. They're really trying to make, what's the word I'm thinking of? They're trying to make, Lisa, what's the word I'm thinking of?
An example of him?
Example, thank you.
Yes,
so precedent.
As a juror, your wheels are turning just like the jurors' wheels might be turning. Take that away, Lisa.
Right. They're trying to set a precedent. They're trying to make an example of them, which is not what prosecutors are supposed to do. And Nathan makes a really important point about the connection between our government and Big Ag, which are the companies that have these torture chambers and death chambers for so many millions of sentient beings, like the little piglets, Lily and Lizzie, that we're talking about in this case. And our tax dollars go to subsidize these companies to the tune of many millions of dollars. Why are tax dollars dollars are subsidizing the meat companies that contribute so much to climate change, animal suffering, and terrible human health. That's a travesty. But there is that connection. And so the government decided to rush in and defend Smithfield, a multi-billion-dollar company that's very capable of defending itself if it wants to, and to bring this prosecution. And, you know, Jane, I was struck by one of the videos that you showed of a community member who said, you know, well, at first somebody she knew said, oh, it's these crazy vegans. And then that's how people think of us when they really don't know us and what we stand for. And then she said, you know, she kind of came around and realized that this is about protecting animals, innocent animals. And she joined in with the people supporting Wayne and Paul outside the courthouse. And I think that's the trajectory that many people go through. If you don't know vegans, it might sound weird and kooky, but you realize that you love animals, you care about them, and how they get onto your plate is just a horror show that has to be covered up by these big ag companies, covered up behind closed doors. Don't let people in. Don't get cameras in. If somebody does get cameras in, don't let that come into the trial, right? Why is there so much cover up? Because they cannot bear to let people see what really goes on behind closed doors and the torture and suffering that they impose on innocent animals every day.
So, Gwenna Hunter, do you think this whole trial could backfire? The law of unintended consequences. People are tweeting about it. We're talking about it. You've got 100 people in a theater in Utah watching it. Do you think in that sense that it's quite often in history that the more you try to persecute someone or a movement, the more prominent it becomes in the minds of the public?
Absolutely. I definitely, after watching the little bit that I was able to watch today, I realized, I'm like, yeah, this whole thing could possibly backfire because there was so much, you know, and everybody calls Wayne brilliant. And I agree. Like the way he was dropping information, even though I know he knew things were going to be objected, but he still was putting information in there because no matter if you're a judge, if you're a juror, you're still a human being. You still have a heart. You still have emotions. You still know what suffering is. So you can try to block all those things out, but you're still a human being. And I think he did a fantastic job of planting compassion and using certain words. And like everyone on the panel has said already, I heard the judge use Lizzie. I was like, did he just say Lizzie? I'm like, got him.
Oh gosh, that's such a great point. I want to say Lisa Bloom, not only a dear friend, but a very prominent, famous attorney. We are so honored to have you here on Unchained TV. I know you have to run off to trial. You defend a lot of good, innocent people. So I'll let you go, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. And everyone on this panel, thank you for what you do. And everybody who's watching, who stands up for animals in any way that you can. God bless you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa Bloom. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting to have her. You know, just to make a quick point, Unchained TV is a global streaming network. This is also streaming on our webpage, UnchainedTV.com. It is also streaming on our app, which is a 100% vegan app. You can download it on your phone for free. You can download it via Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, or your Roku device on your TV, or you could watch it on UnchainedTV.com. And it's 100% nonprofit, fueled by volunteers like all the people you are looking here, Gwenna, Karen LaCava, Simone Reyes, Amira. Nathan, we're going to get you in the pack. But it's volunteer just to put out the word, because having spent 40 years in mainstream news, the frustration of not seeing this should be on the front page of the New York Times. Okay, this should be on the front page of the Washington Post. And while we have these cute little feature stories in a local news, bravo to them. I mean, St. George News is doing a bang-up job providing video to us, etc. But where is the mainstream media, Simone Reyes?
Well, as usual, we are always locked out, right? If you show what really existed in slaughterhouses and even in the transport trucks going to slaughterhouses, you know, veganism, while it's growing very quickly, and I'm very impressed with how quickly our numbers are growing, it would literally be, you know, driving across the entire continent. It would be something that there would be an undeniable uprising if everybody was allowed to see what goes on. And that is why we have to fight so hard to get these videos out there. In this trial in particular, While I think Wayne is brilliant and it's going so well, I am very disappointed that most audio, if not all audio, of what went on in this horrible facility is not being allowed, because pigs in particular express their emotions through their voices. They cry. I have heard it many, many times. They sob, they scream. And to not have that allowed it's a hit for us, for sure, because, and they know it. And that's why we are not allowed to use it, right? Because if you hear the screams and you can differentiate between a happy pig sound, which I guarantee you is not there, and a pig that is in complete distress and fear, it goes through you, it chills you, and it stops you, and it makes you see these animals as sentient beings.
I want to go to Elmira because I know she can't stay. You make a very good point, Simone, very long. A couple of things. One, we have Gene saying, I think the meat industry is going to regret taking this to trial. Their reputation, public perception will suffer. Do you see, and if you could unmute your mic, thank you for muting because I know it's noisy out there. Do you see that happening? Are you getting a sense that, oh, this is a runaway freight train going in the wrong direction for the meat industry?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I think the prosecution, especially yesterday, did a really bad job presenting evidence, but I don't know how much that will reflect on the meat industry as a whole. And I think part of that is what you were getting at, the lack of mainstream media coverage. I'm holding out hope that people are going to cover this as like the trial ends, and there's a verdict, and then they can write something about it. But it's a gamble, and I have been pretty disappointed with the lack of mainstream media coverage, kind of from the bigger outlets. It is why we sometimes do sensational things, like running onto football fields on the first day of trial, because unfortunately, that is what people are going to cover. And I'm very happy that they covered that. But I think that this trial happening right here is way more of a story than two people running onto a football field. But it's clickbaity, it's easier to understand, it's quick. Kind of interesting for the general masses, and doesn't require a whole bunch of thought to write an article about it, I think, is maybe the issue. So that's kind of our way of getting that. I'm hoping we get some more in-depth pieces. And I think when those pieces come out, like if we do have a New York Times story, which I am still crossing my fingers for, we are in touch with a reporter there. I think that is when the meat industry is really going to have their public relations hit. Is what I would say. So we're hoping that happens. And in the meantime, super grateful for outlets like yours, Jane, and St. George News. And I was just talking to a Salt Lake Tribune reporter today. There are some people covering it, but I agree it needs to be way more.
Yeah, and here's somebody who says, why isn't Maddow covering this? Wolf Blitzer too. Agreed. I know that it's ironic. The local media is doing a better job covering this than the most important publications in the world. And I always go back to the idea where the best and the brightest, the book, The Best and the Brightest is a sarcastic title. The Best and the Brightest brought us the Vietnam quagmire. So, sometimes the best and the brightest ain't too smart. They should be covering this. But again, look at the pressure. If you watch even the most progressive channels, their commercials are almost exclusively meat and dairy. It doesn't take a brain surgery. Nobody has to knock on your door and say, don't talk about this. They do the math. And so, yes, I think Elmira had to step. Oh, no, she's still there. Great. Let me ask you, you're nodding your head, Nathan, in terms of the lack of one last thing, Elmira, you're saying that you don't see any kind of reporters from any big publications there. I just want to make sure, because is it possible that they're taking notes and then they're waiting for the verdict?
Well, I think the issue here is that there's been a complete media blackout by the judge. So I understand why the New York Times didn't send someone here when they're literally not allowed to go into the courtroom. The judge has indicated that only one news outlet is allowed in the courtroom, and it's the St. George News. So that's why no one else is here. I know there was other reporters like Marina Bolotnikova. I think you had her on your show. She was going to come here and cover it, but why would she come here just to sit at a computer like everyone else? And so people are at home. So I don't think, there are no prominent journalists here, but they are getting the daily updates we are in touch with the New York Times, and they're responding to our emails, which is nice. And then I'll say that
they're watching the WebEx feed of the trial.
Yeah, I don't know if they have the time to watch the whole thing, but we are sending. I'm actually right after this going to rush home and start cutting some key clips from some of the footage from the last couple days. And I will say we do have two documentary crews here and a podcast crew here. So those are kind of long projects. One of these documentaries has been over 2.5 years in the making at this point. So it's not going to come out anytime soon, but hopefully when it does, it's going to be amazing. So those are kind of things that will eventually come out and I think be really great. But I do want a little bit of that instant gratification right now, because I think it would make everybody feel like, wow, more people are paying attention to this.
Well, it's not over till it's over. It might end up being that the appeals process is the big news maker, because honestly, if he's convicted, I can't see this being held up on appeal. And, just the idea, Gwen, I know you're not an attorney, but they've talked, and you can weigh in on this, Nathan, that they opened the door. The prosecution talked about they made a videotape going in to commit the burglary. Since they mentioned it, I would think that would be something that hopefully they've asked. You've opened the door, Your Honor. We'd like to present the video, and repeatedly asked to present that video over and over again. And even if you're denied, that would be a grounds for an appeal. And maybe I'll just go back to Elmira on that. I just want to clarify, because yesterday the attorneys who were on were like, they opened the door. They've got to ask to be able to play that trial, that video, the Death Star video. Do you know if the defense is asking over and over again, even if they're shut down, to play that video?
I don't actually know the answer to that question. I think my sense is probably yes, even though I think there's a 99% chance Judge Wilcox is going to say absolutely not. But I think that a lot of what the defense is doing is just putting these things on record for the appeal. And it's really upsetting. Before trial, on all the pre-trial motions, Judge Wilcox kept saying oh, bring that up on the appeal, bring that up on the appeal. The trial hasn't happened yet, and he's already assuming there's going to be an appeal, assuming that there's going to be a guilty verdict. And just that is an incredibly biased statement from a judge when the trial hasn't even happened yet. So I think we are keeping a pretty good record of all of the things that are, I think, constitutionally fraught in this case in order to appeal if we lose.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. So, Gwenna, again, your take on all this. I mean, could the appeal be the biggest story if, in fact, he's convicted? The big story will be, and I've seen this many times, okay? I can't tell you how many open and shut cases. I mentioned the Michael Jackson trial was considered an open and shut case. He was acquitted on all counts. You had the Casey Anthony trial, which I also covered in Florida, considered an open and shut case. She was also acquitted of everything except lying. And people were outraged and running around. I was there. I was practically knocked over as hundreds of people were running around the courtyard screaming, how is this possible? So you never know. Trials, especially high-profile trials, are like runaway freight trains, and you never know where they're going to end up, Gwenna.
I completely agree. And to add to what Elmira said, I personally believe that when the trial is over, this is when all the coverage is going to begin. So I don't believe this is going to be, where it's just going to be here on this platform and with the St. George News and the Intercept. I think once the trial is over, or whatever the verdict is, this whole thing is going to open up, and this is going to be global. And I predict this is going to be a shift in humanity and a shift in consciousness and a shift, just like how what happened with Anita, that created a shift. And I believe this is going to create a shift as well. So again, I think Wayne is doing a great job. The only thing that, based on what I've watched over the past several days, the only thing I've really seen is that Wayne is a compassionate citizen that broke the law. That's it.
Yeah. But I want to say this, and you can address this, Nathan. I've also covered a lot of trials where people afterwards when they talk to the jury, and if it's a high profile trial, you know, a network will sit down with all the jurors and they'll weigh in. And, oh, our hearts went out to so and so, but the jury instructions were such that we had no choice. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard that.
Yeah, and it's why the prosecution is really trying to focus solely on the elements, because they, you know, consider everything else sort of pulling on the heartstrings and essentially trying to keep the jury from nullifying, which means that despite the evidence being proven beyond a reasonable doubt, they still acquit. The jury doesn't have to explain its verdict. You never hear why. It's just guilty or not guilty. So we never really know if a jury found that the elements were met or whether they in fact nullified for reasons such as, you know, compassion, understanding, feeling bad for the defense, considering punishment, not wanting to see someone go to jail for a case like this. You brought up the FBI's involvement earlier. I can't help but there has to be at least somebody on that jury who has to be thinking to themselves, what the hell are my tax dollars being spent by the federal government having a dozen FBI agents, God knows how many analysts involved in a case involving 2 piglets? So I think when you talk about high profile cases, I think there's been a real effort here to keep this from being a high profile case. I mean, I'm practicing for 25 years. I have never, ever seen a judge, you know, exclude media the way that's been done in this case. Sure, cameras in the courtroom, photos in the well, that happens. But this court's not even allowing many people in the courtroom. There's a real effort to keep this from being a high profile case. And maybe that's because the cases that you mentioned, Jane, acquittals that sort of come out of left field won't happen here because it's not a high profile case, because, you know, such efforts are being made to keep it from being a high profile case.
Well, I still think it can take off. It could soar. Marina Bolotnikova, who is reporting on this for The Intercept and juggling so many things, I don't even know how you do it, but thank you for joining us. This was, I think, one of the most extraordinary days in court that I've ever experienced. Why don't you give us your summary and tell us your reaction to it?
Yes. So the defense started making its case today. The past couple of days have just been the prosecution's witnesses. So Wayne Hsiung, sorry, court is restarting. Let me just mute that feed so I can keep talking here. Wayne Hsiung gave his opening statement and started testifying as a defendant. I was really struck by how much I was surprised by how much he was able to get away with in the opening statement in terms of talking about his motivations, why he went into the factory farm, the kinds of conditions he saw there, the conditions that the piglets that they rescued were in. The prosecution made a lot of objections to it, and some of the things he was trying to say were shut down. But I think I think he really got his message across to the jury. And then when he started his testimony, he talked a bit about his childhood, growing up to Taiwanese immigrants in Indiana. He did what I thought was a smart move in terms of kind of trying to transcend, trying to make this a bit of less of a culture war issue by talking about how he, his best friend growing up was his dog, and he was traumatized traveling to China and seeing dogs being slaughtered for food. I thought that was an interesting way of kind of trying to appeal to a more, maybe a more, conservative way of seeing the world.
And to that end, I wanted to point out, he also said his family was fleeing communism. Did he not?
Yeah. And he was able to show some images and videos specifically of of one of the piglets that they took out, Lily. before we broke for lunch, he had started talking about the second piglet, Lizzie, talking about how they found her covered in blood. He wants to show video of that. The prosecution is objecting, saying it's too graphic. It'll make the again, this issue of horrifying the jury and making them incapable of evaluating the evidence objectively. And that was where, so that was kind of where things were left off before lunch. The judge was saying that it sounds like he wants to show a still from the footage of Lizzie that shows her face covered in blood, but does not show where the blood is coming from, which is from her mother's bleeding nipple that she's nursing on.
Wow. And, one of the things that I want to mention just as a person, I thought it was really interesting, Simone. He asked the question, the prosecution objects, the objection is sustained, but then sometimes the judge say that's going to be stricken from the record. Okay. Now, even if it's stricken from the record, it's still, as Gwenna said, goes into the mind. So when Wayne said, I thought was one of the most powerful things, he said words to the effect of, well, we didn't steal anything that had value to the company because we knew from what we saw that a pig like this that's so small, a runt and injured, is just going to be thrown in the dumpster with all the dead pigs. Objection! And then there was a whole thing about don't say anything about dumpsters. But still, it goes into the jurors' minds.
It does. And that is obviously, sort of something that a lot of lawyers, and I watch a lot of trials, just in general, I find them very, very interesting, that they employ, because they know that they are, as Gwenna said, talking to jurors, but they are human. And when we hear things, we internalize them. Sometimes we have to hear them many times, which is why I think that dumpster kept coming up over and over again, no matter how many times that it was objected to and sustained. That word came up many, many times because it was an obvious part of showing value and showing how invaluable.
This is the picture of a dumpster with all the dead piglets. You can see there's so many. And there was something, I just want to jump in real quick and ask Elmira about this. And I jump back from Elmira and Elmira, and I'm embarrassed. I correct me. But there was this reference that actually Marina, I'm going to bring Marina back. Marina, you tweeted something about it was established that how many tons of dead piglets are permitted to be put in a landfill? Please clarify it. I don't want to misconstrue it, but you tweeted about this.
Yes, Smithfield has a permit to dispose 18.2 million pounds of dead pigs, and also there were also other kinds of waste listed, like artificial insemination supplies, construction debris, and stuff like that, into a landfill. But it definitely sounds like dead pigs are the primary kind of waste. And Wayne said from being there that the 90+% of what was in the dumpsters were dead bodies, and that's not that's not surprising. 18 million pounds. This industry throws away a lot of animals, and 18 million pounds a year at the biggest pork factory farm facility in the country isn't. It's shocking, but it makes sense.
Unbelievable. I mean, right there. Oh my God. Okay, we're going to go back to our trial watcher, Karen Cava, vegan realtor and chef and caterer. So you're kind of like playing the role of an average trial watcher. You don't have legal expertise at all. When you hear something like that, what runs through your heart and your head?
So here's the one thing that's kind of been glazed over is it was testified by one of the experts that work there that the dead pigs actually have value because some of them are used for rendering. And rendering is for dog food, but it's also to feed other farm animals. Now, I highly doubt that the prosecution is going to bring this up because it will also bring into light how nasty the meat industry is. I mean, way back when mad cow disease was happening, a lot of it was caused from the cows eating the rendered meat from dead animals. So this should be interesting if they're going to try to use that as value for the dead animals. And another thing is, because it was brought up by this witness, I would think that Wayne could actually use the dumpster and talk about it. But it's kind of been glazed over, which is an interesting fact that people haven't really noticed. It was so quickly mentioned. What do you think about that?
All right, Nathan, you're the attorney. I muted myself for a second because there's a leaf blower outside. The strategy of asking questions you know are going to be objected to, that's a common strategy. You try to get that information in any which way you can, even if the judge says objection. And in some ways, if the prosecution says objection, in some ways it kind of emphasizes the point. Can these constant objections backfire on the prosecution?
You know, I was watching Wayne testify today, and I listened to the prosecutor object over and over and over and over again. And each time she objected, Wayne basically started giving the same answer again and again and again and again. And the jury's going to remember it. And then you have to wonder, is that really effective strategy by the prosecution? Because instead of a jury possibly, hearing it one time and maybe forgetting about it, now not only have they heard it several times, but they know it's a real point of issue. And what I think, jumps out, at least to me, is every objection is an effort to hide evidence. It's an effort to hide the bigger picture here. And I think it's obviously apparent to all of us here and your viewers, but I think anybody is going to see that, this prosecution team really doesn't want the jury, who is supposed to be the deciders of fact, to know the truth. And so I agree with you. I think that's what's happening each time they object.
Gwenna Hunter, again, founder of Vegans of LA, as well as Vegans for Black Lives Matter, a very powerful social media presence here in LA and nationally. I know you have to go. I want to hear your thoughts before you leave. Like, what are your big takeaways? Oh, if you could unmute. Thank you.
I would say that I am very optimistic after the past few days. I wasn't in the beginning, but I feel very optimistic. The seeds that Wayne has been planting throughout the entire trial about himself, about his family, about where he comes from, why he does this, personalizing the pigs, having them, be called Lizzie by the judge. I feel very, very optimistic that this is going to work out in his favor. So I know his team is like meditating and praying for him and sending him all these powerful thoughts. And again, I have hope that this will work in the favor, because it feels like people are feeling something for this. And the fact that they have to keep protecting and move, like they know what this looks like. That's why they don't want anyone else to see it. That judge looked at that video. They know what this looks like and how it made them feel, which is why they're doing all of this. So I'm hopeful that this will work out in his favor.
Well, thank you for joining us, Gwenna. You've provided excellent coverage. I hope you're back tomorrow, where we're going to be able to play Wayne's, because what happens is the pool reporter sends the video in the evening. It's such a large file. I started downloading it last night and woke up this morning with yesterday's footage. Tomorrow's footage is going to be gangbusters, because I think I'm just going to play as much as I can of Wayne talking. It's really one of the most fascinating trial days that I can say, and I've covered like dozens and dozens of trials. I want to ask Amira Towner, you're about to go back into court. I love the idea of people being optimistic, but I've also seen so many situations where that optimism is crushed by that final verdict. And my concern is that, yes, even if you're counting on an appeal, you're in a state, Utah, nothing against it. I've visited St. George. It's a gorgeous place. But if the same mentality that is basically skewing this trial exists in the appeals court level. I mean, let's not forget that Wayne could go to prison and Paul Picklesimer could go to prison for 11 years.
Yeah, it's a very real possibility. And I think despite, the trial going much better than most people would have expected, I think that it's still a very uphill battle. I don't think this is at all a slam dunk. I think there is a very, very real risk of conviction and prison time. And it's something that we're prepared for. I think it's something that Paul and Wayne are very prepared for, down to the very last details of, I know how to log into their social media accounts and have their bank passwords. And we are ready. And I think that Paul and Wayne are willing to make that sacrifice, knowing that people in the movement will not use that to stop and be afraid, but will use it as something to kind of accelerate and amplify their commitment to taking action. So if they go to prison and the movement grows and we do even more stuff and we rescue more animals and we get more media attention and more people change their minds on this, it will be a win. And I know that that's how Paul and Wayne feel as well.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us. I know you're very busy. You run DXC. Essentially, you're the lead organizer, and you have all these other incredible hundreds and hundreds of people. More than 100 of them are there in Utah, and most of them don't live in Utah. Thank you. I know you have to go back into court, and hopefully we'll see either you or one of your representatives tomorrow for the big day. Last quick question. Do you think that we're going to have a verdict tomorrow? Do you think this is going to wrap up, or is it going to go into next week?
This is something I've never heard of, but I heard talk of the judge saying that if it's not done on Friday, we are continuing onto Saturday. I didn't know that was a thing, but
wow.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot depends on how fast the other witnesses go and how much, if Wayne has his way, this will go for a long time, but it's how much the judge is going to shut him down with questions for the other witnesses.
Good to know. Thank you so much. Oh, wow.
All right.
Amira Tanner, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And okay, so now we're going to play a little here just to give you an idea. If you haven't watched the hours and hours and hours of trial coverage, here is a defense attorney, because there's two men on trial. This is one of the defense attorneys. Wayne's representing himself. Here's another attorney, and how she gets shut down while she tries to accurately describe a modern day factory farm.
It's not like my grandparents' farm in Kansas or my grandparents' farm in Idaho. It's not a personal residence. So you're not going to hear testimony that there was a farm family living on this property and terrorized by some group of people who came into their private residence or the property surrounding the private residence. That's not any evidence that you're going to hear. That's not what we're talking about. What's been described to you in opening statements as a barn is an industrial structure.
Your Honor, I think I'm going to object here. I think that this is a trial about a burglary and theft and not about the character. I'm sorry to interrupt that statement.
Counsel brought up that this was a barn, brought up people on the premises, Your Honor, and I think I'm entitled to explain that I believe the evidence is going to be contrary to the way it's represented.
I'm sustaining the objection.
So there you hear it. Let's go to our attorney. Nathan, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent with what we've seen all along, which is the prosecution being able to paint this, picture using terms like farm and barns as if it's sort of a mom and pop farm. And we know it's not. They know it's not. And the defense should have every right to paint a portrait that is really depicted in reality. It is mind-boggling to me that they're not being permitted to do it. I think it's a fair question to ask why they're not being allowed to do it. From my experience, generally speaking, courts tend to sort of bend over backwards to protect the accused because, if a person is acquitted, there's no appeal. But if they're convicted, then the case is appealed and the case could potentially be reversed, and no judge wants to be reversed. So usually on a close call, and I don't even consider that a close call, they will err on the side of allowing the defense some latitude. we're not seeing that here at all. And I think it's just more of what we've been talking about in terms of trying to shield the public, trying to shield Smithfield, shielding the public from seeing what is really going on at this industrial facility.
So Simone Reyes, when you look at social media, because you're big on social media, in a way, this has become the social media trial. Mainstream media is ignoring this trial to, I'd say, a extreme degree. And yet it's all over social media. There's tweets. We're reporting on it. People are watching feeds that they can get of the trial, even though we can't broadcast it until we get the video from St. George News, which is the pool camera, and that comes late at night. But maybe this is sort of like that turning point where social media becomes more relevant than mainstream media. And by the way, throughout the course of human history, and I learned this actually visiting a civil rights museum, that one of the reasons why, for example, churches in the South, predominantly African-American churches in the South, became more political is that the media wouldn't cover anything that happened in their community. Any problems, any issues, any disputes, it was like it didn't happen. So they started essentially using the church as a way to get the word out. And when I read that, when I saw that touring a civil rights museum, I thought that's really interesting. You think the mainstream media is always on the forefront of change, but in fact, throughout the course of human history, with various social justice movements, they've pretty much reflected the status quo. And it's only very exceptional, occasional reporting that deviates from that. Simone.
Well, it's clear that we see with mainstream media that they are beholden to animal agriculture. That's where the marketing money comes from. And it's a sad commentary. However, the new generations of activists are getting their news primarily from social media, which is incredible. It's why we're seeing veganism getting bigger and bigger as each year goes on. It's why people are joining the movement more, because they're actually seeing the insides of slaughterhouses. They're seeing what happens in transport trucks. They're getting information that isn't readily available on what meat and dairy does to the human body, how it is harmful on so many levels. We're reading about climate change, global warming. That's not being reported by mainstream media for the most part. So this trial, I think, actually will be a pivotal step in gaining more people's awareness to what happens to animals, because it is on social media a lot. And the one thing that keeps coming up is, it's becoming like a social media, slogan kind of thing of, gosh, haven't seen so many federal charges being levied against people that are visiting, places where plant food is made, right? It would never happen. But now we're seeing images, and there are some images coming out, thankfully, not a lot of video, but images of what these piglets look like. And they may never see, the jury may never see what the mother looked like, and that's really, really unfortunate, or what the hundreds of thousands of other animals look like in this facility. But just seeing, a piglet with a bloodied face might be enough, at least on social media, to push our agenda even further.
Yes, and I just want to show a couple of the disgusting photos again. Let me get rid of that banner. I want to show just a snippet because I don't want to gross out our viewers. Honestly, downloading these videos has been so depressing because we can't show you most of it. First of all, sometimes it's too graphic even for social media. We had somebody streaming our feed on TikTok and got shut down. And they said they were very upset. Our feed got shut down because what we were showing was too graphic, and what we're showing is just a tiny little itsy bitsy snippet here. Okay, a bloody piglet. This is one of the piglets, I believe, the two piglets that they're accused of stealing. You can see there's blood all over her snout. And this is too gross for words. Do the math on that. It's prolapse, whatever, disgusting feces, This is the dumpster. We've gotten testimony that we heard about that, enormous tons of dead pigs and dead piglets are permitted to be put into that's what they have. That's their byproduct. That's stuff they throw out. They throw out these living beings as if they're trash. And here is Wayne with one of the pigs who was rescued. And again, the FBI had something like 8 agents running around chasing these pigs all over town. And here's an interesting aspect to this. Okay, so they went in to the facility in like March of 2017. Smithfield had no idea that there was any theft. How did they find out about it? Well, there was testimony from one of the Smithfield manager that he saw it on Google, but indeed the New York Times is how I first learned of it. Animal welfare groups have a new tool, virtual reality. And the New York Times did an article where they talk about dead piglets are piled up behind a sow, wedged into a crate so tightly she cannot move away from the mess. But a viewer can turn around from her and see and hear sows in similar straits all around her. And then you have the New York Times proceeding to say sows with bloody and mangled teats. That's what's come up in the trial. And I just have to say, Circle 4, which is owned by Smithfield, which was bought in 2013 by one of China's largest meat companies, the spokeswoman said the video had blatant inaccuracies, such as assertions that the animals in it are being starved. Well, the New York Times said that the piglets are eating each other. So I don't know. You got a choice between some nice food that is provided and eating your sibling. Which are you going to choose? You'd only do that as a last resort. I don't care what kind of living being you are. So all of this together, Karen, as playing the role of the average trial watcher, you're there. You want to follow the letter of the law. You want to follow the jurors' instructions. What would you take away from the way it's like the story is coming out in dribs and drabs, just little words like dumpster, Death Star, Operation Death Star video, mangled teats. What do you do the math as a juror, do you think?
Yes. I mean, you cannot unhear what is spoken, even if the judge says that you're not supposed to. You just cannot. And from some of the questions the jurors have been asking, you can tell that there are some compassionate thoughts going on there. Even if they do eat bacon or whatever, you can see that these people are registering what is being told to them. You can't unhear it. And I think also that the jurors are seeing that the judge is biased. How could they not? I think that it's pretty obvious, even to somebody who is not a vegan, who is not an animal rights activist, who is just your average person, that too many objections are being allowed by the prosecution. I am very happy that this morning I did see that the judge was coming around a little bit. And the fact that he's calling the piglets by their names, which we've spoken about already, I do think that is a huge, huge thing, and it will help the jurors have more of a connection to them other than objects. It's really important that Wayne and the other attorney push that, and they've done a great job. They really have. And they've also done a great job in case they need to appeal.
So lay out what happens next. I mean, obviously, we're in the defense case. Then there's a rebuttal case. So I don't see this ending on Friday. Do you? I'm sorry, Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine cross-examination is going to go on for some time. I don't know. I don't have the volume on right now, so I don't know if that's even started. But then, the defense has other witnesses they're going to call. It's not just Wayne. Then I don't know. The rebuttal question is interesting here because particularly on the burglary count in which Wayne says the purpose, he testified that his purpose was going in to investigate and document, not to take any animals. There's some evidence in the video that I suppose could be used to suggest otherwise, but I don't think the prosecution will go down that route, because if they start to use the video, then it's all going to come in, and I don't think that's going to happen. But then you have 3 summations, and then you have a jury being charged on the law. I have a feeling if the judge stays true to his word, we're going to be talking about this on Saturday.
What do you mean? It's going to be, you think that there's going to be a verdict tomorrow?
No. No way. I mean, I think there's...
Oh, when you say talking about this, you're saying
no.
It's still going on?
Yes.
Can you clarify?
Yes, exactly. I think the trial will still be going on. My guess is the jury won't see this case until at least late Friday, maybe Saturday or Monday, depending on what the judge does. And then, trying to predict when there's a verdict is an exercise in futility. You can never figure out.
They could deliberate for days. But I do know that sometimes jurors get annoyed if they feel one side is dragging the case along, they form a resentment against that side, irrespective of whether that side is making really good points. Because let's face it, speaking for myself, I do not clamor to be a juror. Okay. And I think most people do their best. I mean, I'm making a very big generalization. Maybe some retired people find it entertaining, but my experience, most people do their best to avoid jury selection because they have lives and they want to get on with it. So, it's a tricky dance, Simone Reyes. If Wayne goes on too long, that could create some resentments for the jurors.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm one of those people that tries very hard to knock it on a jury. But he's strategically doing everything that I think you or I, if we were representing ourselves, would want to do, which is he is pushing to get all the information out before he is shut down, right? Which is basically the prosecution's job, right? To shut him down. And so he's trying to give as much information as he can before he gets objected to. And I think it's a good strategy. And I think that when you're dealing with something that we have to remember, not just the people in Utah, all around the world have been conditioned to believe, which is that animals are basically commodities, machines, that they don't have any feelings at all, that they don't suffer in the same way that a human does. He has to chip away at that thought process that's been ingrained in humans since the beginning of time. So I think that, if he's going on too long, I honestly don't think that it will hurt him or the case, because it really, really does take, and studies have shown this, for people to hear the same things repeated many times for them to truly digest it. And so every time that, he's objected to and he kind of slips it in again, and then he's objected to something else, like the word dumpster, which was, it came over and over and over again until finally the judge said, you really need to stop using that word. I thought it was fantastic, and I thought it was a great strategy.
Okay, so I want to play a clip of the prosecution's opening statement, because the prosecution themselves referred to a video, which blows my mind. Like, they said that there's this video, then the jurors know, wait, where's that video? I haven't seen that video, which the prosecution themselves later referred to as Operation Death Star video, which sounds like a horror film, which it is. Let's listen to this and then analyze it on the other side. This is a tiny snippet of the prosecution's opening statement against Paul and Wayne.
Now, the facts in this case will show that, among other things, Milford Valley is home to Smithfield Foods, where they raise pigs. Now, the facts in this case are that early in the winter months of 2017, probably the month of March, under the cover of darkness, Mr. Wayne Hsiung and Mr. Paul Picklesimer, along with a few others, entered an unauthorized area owned by Smithfield Farms, crossing over a barrier fence, making unlawful entry into a bar, and while inside the bar, without permission of the owners, removing the pigs, stealing. Now, Now, while they committed this, the evidence will show they filmed themselves doing it, then posted the video online. Now, they had two objectives in doing that. The first, of course, was to draw attention to their cause. The second was to engage in a little bit of fundraising, to seek out donations from people online. Now, the evidence will show that after the pigs were removed from Smithville, the pigs were delivered north to Harriman, Utah, where they stayed at chain farms in the Harriman area. The pigs remained there for a little while until eventually they were delivered to Colorado.
So, yeah, I want to ask you, Nathan, now why doesn't that mean that, okay, they opened the door, they said they videotaped themselves. How is it that they can possibly stop that videotape of the crime from being shown? I still don't understand. Like, yes, you can appeal it after the case is over, but there's no recourse when something is as obvious as that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's a great grounds for appeal. Hopefully, we don't get to that point because there's an acquittal. But you know, I guess the sort of the silver lining, the instant feel good moment I suppose we could have on that is rule one for any trial attorney giving an opening statement is don't make promises you can't keep. Don't promise that the jury's going to see something that you can't deliver on. You know, we say how you got to have the receipts. Well, he's talking about what's depicted on a video. He's talking about fundraising in his opening statement. He didn't deliver on those things at all. So I think if you're a juror, you have to be left thinking, why are you not showing me this video? I mean, you're referring to it. Your witnesses have come to conclusions based upon seeing it. Do you not trust us to be able to view it ourselves? So, you know, going back to something you talked about a little earlier about, you know, resentment, I think that could factor in there also, that the jury could resent the prosecutors for sort of, you know, treating them like children, treating them like fools, and trying to, you know, pull a fast one and not deliver on what they promised in the opening.
Well, look, it could be me. Obviously, I have a point of view here, just like MSNBC has a point of view and Fox News has a point of view. We have a point of view, but it doesn't mean we ignore the facts. But I kind of felt watching him that he reeked of insincerity. You know, he's got this smile like, and it's a pig's, you know, it just was like, I don't know. Let's go to our faux juror, vegan realtor, chef, and caterer, Marina Bolotnikova. You're playing the part of juror. You're not a lawyer. I grabbed you yesterday. You said you were watching the trial just as an interested party. I said, well, you're as close to a juror as we're going to get. So what was your reaction to that opening statement?
He's mentioning things like they were asking for donations, and he was basically quoting them in a sense. But that's hearsay. Unless the videos are shown, that's hearsay. And the judge is allowing that, whereas they don't allow hearsay when it comes to a witness on the stand. It just seems to me that if a video is being mentioned over and over again, it should be allowed to be seen by the jurors. It's just, I would totally resent that. And it might send a bias in one direction because of that, you know? And I will say one thing too, is somebody was talking about the mannerisms of the prosecution. And I once watched a trial and then interviewed the jurors. And one of the reasons they went to a verdict that actually was not a correct verdict from the evidence, it was because they were annoyed by one of the defendants because she was too happy versus more serious. You know, she probably was happy because she was nervous, you know? So you see these things, and so many different things can affect the jurors. And I personally would be affected by the fact that I am not allowed to see a video that's mentioned over and over again. It's just not fair to the jurors either.
Yeah, I mean, I again, this is just my opinion, and maybe I'm biased, but he struck me as like that used car salesman who wants to sell you that beat up car that if once you push it off a lot, it doesn't work. Having experienced that myself personally, I got that vibe. Simone Reyes, what do you think?
Well, obviously I am biased, right? But just everything about the prosecutor's demeanor, where he uses the word pigs, smiling at the jury, like, oh, it's so hilarious, like they care about pigs, and his depiction of an industrial, factory farm sort of situation, where we know that in these institutions they're meant to maximize production, while minimizing costs. That means that there's total disregard for any living beings in there, including the workers, by the way, typically with most of these factory farms, right? We've learned that also. So the way that he uses the word farm, like, oh, it's this little ma and pa, and everybody is happy, and the animals on the farm are just having fun, and they snuck into this little farm is what he's making it seem like, which is so far from the truth. And that's what the videos would show. And that's why it's so important that the fight, continues to get every single image. If they're not going to allow videos, every single image to fight for them, because what people want to believe is that their food was respected and loved. And there was some sacrifice, right? Which is not the situation at all. And so everything that about him just drives me crazy. I can't stand it.
Yeah, I mean, I had that visceral reaction too. And, sometimes I don't have a negative visceral reaction to an attorney who's representing a side that I might think is the wrong side. But I figure the guy's doing a job or the gal's doing a job. I have nothing personal, but there was just something about him that just made my skin crawl. Now, let me ask you this, Nathan. You have to go in a minute. The big picture here. It was described as a simple breaking and entry and theft. Obviously, 8 FBI agents, a massive prosecution on a case where each animal is worth at best $40-some. Okay. The jury, knowing also that even if they keep the protesters away from the courthouse, they've got to get a vibe that this is not just a regular trial. It would normally, okay, here's another question I have that just popped into my head. Like, if something happens where, let's say somebody stole my bike, which maybe that happened, they would say, well, you've got to go to a certain court for not important cases. Like, that's a small claim court. Why isn't this, if indeed these animals, which we consider priceless, are only worth $44 or $45 market value, why wouldn't this have ended up in small claims court?
Yeah, I mean, it's he's charged with a crime. They are charged with a crime. So I suppose it can't be brought in a civil courtroom. But, to your point, I think it's apparent to anybody watching that this is, what I would consider a political prosecution. That you have, jurors who have jobs and lives, who are being asked to take time out of their lives, and you're talking about sending people to prison for 10 and 11 years for something that, in their estimation, is not worth the price of that probably spectacular bike that you had stolen from you. So there's just such an injustice to that, and it makes you wonder, what are we, if you're a juror, what are we doing here? Why are all these resources being spent here? But the bigger picture is, if they're going to do this, if they're going to, waste our time, why are they hiding most of it from us?
Well, I know you have to go, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time. You're a prominent New York City attorney, and I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully you'll come back. If you want to come back tomorrow, you can come back tomorrow. We'd love to have you. We're going to just reset. If you're just joining us, we are doing coverage primarily during the lunch break of this extraordinary trial, the trial of Wayne Hsiung and Paul Picklesimer, who could spend 11 years in prison each for rescuing 2 piglets from a ginormous factory farm and videotaping the whole thing with virtual reality cameras, 360-degree cameras. And it's an absolute shocking trial. The video is something that the prosecution does not want played and which the judge has agreed should not be played. I'm going to play a very short clip of it. It's horrific. It's the stuff of nightmares. Sorry, it is. Okay. And to say otherwise is what I would call an alternative fact. So let's take a look at some of the footage. Here's just one clip.
So you can see most of these crates are intact, but some of them have literally been busted open because these poor mother pigs are so desperate to escape, they smash their faces up against these steel bars until there's a hole that's broken open, and they had to jury-rig this crate door shut with tape. And you can see she's falling on the side of her face. She's got a nasty cut.
All right. And meanwhile, Simone, you know this very well. Prop 12 was passed here in California, which would ban the sale of any products from those crates. And the pork industry right now is taking that issue to the Supreme Court and arguing that that's a violation of interstate commerce and they should be allowed to maintain those crates, even after Smithfield promised years ago that they were going to eliminate those crates and haven't. So this is very interesting timing that this trial is happening at the very same time that the U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether to allow Californians overwhelmingly voting to say, no, you cannot sell products made by, you cannot sell pigs who were raised in gestation crates. You can't sell their dead bodies here in California. Now, California, if it were its own state, is the 5th largest economy in the world. So that would basically have a sweeping effect on the factory farming practices of pigs around the world. The Supreme Court is getting ready to, it's in the midst of hearing that. And I'm very saddened to say that the administration has sided with the pork industry and said they're siding with the pork industry, and it's animal rights organizations, including Animal Outlook. UnchainedTV has a big article on this if you want to read it, that have basically been fighting to say that the will of the people here in California, and by the way, most people think this is an abomination, these pig gestation crates. They're torture devices. The animals are in a crate the size of their bodies. They cannot turn around. That should be illegal. Nonetheless, the pork industry is going to the Supreme Court to be allowed to continue to use those crates. So again, the footage, the jury is not allowed to see, even though the prosecution brought it up. We're going to play another snippet, then we're going to discuss on the other side.
So Circle 4 is a farm that processes and kills 1.2 million pigs every year.
We're about to head into Circle 4. This is the heart of evil. You can already hear the screams of the mother pigs inside. They're cramped, they're suffering, and we're going to try and expose what's actually happening inside. You guys ready to go? Mm-hmm. Let's put our lights on.
Wow. And you made the point earlier, Simone, that to hear it's I should say the video the jurors are not allowed to see or hear.
Very unfortunate, because you don't have to be vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian. It doesn't matter what you are. You hear screams of a living being in distress, and you recognize that. You recognize that if you are a mother, you recognize that if you are an animal parent, you recognize that on any level. Walking in there, the heart of evil is how it was described by Wayne. That is a very good description of that. I can tell you, over the pandemic, I've gotten to know pigs on a very, very strong way, in a very intimate way, because I started rescuing them. And they are, when they are happy, they grunt very, very in low tones. They even sing to their young. There's no mistaking the sounds of a contented and safe pig. Those screams that you are hearing are pigs that are clearly in massive, traumatic amounts of distress. They are obviously in pain. They are obviously terrified. They are obviously suffering. And so the fact that this is not admissible is a huge, huge hit for our side. And it is so incredibly unfair, because when typically, I think it was brought up earlier, when jurors are on a murder trial, I think it was Lisa that brought that up. As somebody who follows trials, you see the most gruesome autopsy photos and crime scene photos. Why in the world this is being held back is so incredibly unfair.
It absolutely is. And it's the heart of the case, because it is video of the alleged crime in progress. That's the irony. And we've said it before, but it bears repeating. Having covered many cases as a crime reporter for 40 years, I can tell you that it's considered gold when the prosecution has videotape of the crime in progress. And of course, law enforcement goes to tremendous lengths to get the security footage. Anytime there's a crime, the first thing they want to do is grab the security footage to see if anybody has video of the crime in progress. So here they have the crime in progress documented with 360-degree cameras, super expensive cameras that were lent to DXC by a high-tech company. And there's no way to say this is taken out of context, because it's literally raw 360-degree video from before they went in, them going in, them talking while they're there, them walking around, them seeing the two piglets, them leaving with the two piglets. It's the entire case. The jury cannot see it. So that is truly, do you think Karen LaCava, vegan realtor here in LA, as well as a vegan caterer and chef, that if you were a juror, because you're kind of playing the role of juror, how much would you say to yourself, wow, I'd like to see that video, and the truth is, it's online. Like, all you have to do is Google Death Star. Now, the judge said, don't look at media, but we know from cases that jurors do.
How could you not? I mean, the court is insulting their intelligence. I would be so insulted and so upset that I cannot see all the evidence. It should be the right of the defendants to prove their case, and they cannot really 100% prove their case if they cannot show the videos, because the videos are the motivation behind their actions. And it will show that they are rescuing piglets that are about to die if they don't save them. It's so infuriating. It's so biased. It's so one-sided. I would really be shocked if the jurors were not watching these videos. And the ones that aren't, I'd be curious as to why they're not. Because are they not curious? Are they just, okay, maybe they're just following court orders. I could understand that. But it's human nature, curiosity, and also to be insulted like that. I mean, it really, as Lisa Bloom was saying, and as Simone was saying, that, with all of these murder cases, when there's much, much worse, disgusting videos than this, they allow the jurors to see it. Do
Oh,
you know,
God,
right?
yeah. You've seen, I covered a trial, the Jodi Arias trial, when they put up video, the family of the victim ran out of the courtroom sobbing, and all hell broke loose because some very graphic photos were put up of the victim, Travis Alexander, who was essentially decapitated almost. So I'll never forget that moment. It went up on the screen, and the family ran out sobbing. So yes, they do see very, very graphic footage. They see graphic videos. It's part for the course. I mean, it happens all the time in trials. So I wonder if that is one of the main grounds for appeal. By the way, this is an anonymous jury. So the jury is not identified. And I want to go to the defendants, Wayne Hsiung and Paul Picklesimer, talking about that, talking about how they really weren't allowed to even figure out who are these people judging whether I'm going to stay in prison for 11 years or not.
There's a broader pattern of suppression, for one, with ag-gag laws, the ATA, activists getting prosecuted in cases like ours that are just completely absurd from any common sense perspective. No one would imagine a prosecution for $42.20.
And let me play the next clip.
The defense argued that because the questionnaire asks if you or someone who you know works in the animal production industry, yes or no, they were saying that that'll let you know if you have a bias or not. When we know that's not the case. People get tattoos of quote-unquote bacon. Like, we need to be able to really know what people are about, what they care about, how they feel about animals in general. And these are things we're just not going to be allowed to find out.
And additionally, at one point, and I don't know if I think they ultimately may have gotten the last names, but the court sort of gave them this list of like first names, like John, Sally, like, honestly, I've covered trials for many years, covered crime for 40 years, and I've covered a lot of trials. I've never seen anything like this. I have never seen anything like this in my entire career. And I think it's going to be taught in schools, like in law schools. Don't do this. Don't do this. Because, judges are elected. They are. And maybe that had something to do with it as well. And also, as somebody mentioned, one of the attorneys we had on, if you're overturned on appeal, it's considered embarrassing and shameful. And so that could end up happening. Additionally, the judge has said quite often during the trial, well, you can take that up and appeal, which essentially telegraphs that he thinks that there's going to be a conviction. That also to me makes no sense. So let me get your take on that, Karen LaCava.
Well, it's obviously this judge, his bias is more important to him than the embarrassment of an appeal, which is kind of scary. I wonder what his connections are to this industry, or if he's just so desensitized because of his eating practices that he really does not care. I do see, though, that he is softening slightly and allowing some things to happen that he wasn't on day one. And that does show some good things as far as that there is maybe is a little humanity in him. I'm not saying that he's an inhumane person because I don't know him or his background, but his actions at this trial do definitely show a bias, and it's not allowing the defendants to be innocent until proven guilty, because they're already not allowing evidence, so as the other attorneys were saying in the commentary earlier, that they're supposed to go out of their way to allow the defendants to prove their innocence, and they're not. It's really one-sided.
I have to say, admission, when I first heard that Wayne was going to represent himself, I thought, oh, that's not a good idea. In fact, there's an old saying in the legal world, anyone who represents themselves has a fool for a client. However, I want to be the first to say that I feel like I was wrong. And I think that his humanity is coming out through you have to be impressed with how he's handling this extremely complicated trial. He's the defendant and he is the defense attorney. So he literally got on the stand, which we're going to show you tomorrow as we bring you clips, longer clips of this trial, because today was the first day that we got to hear from Wayne sitting in the chair and asking himself, like, so tell us about your childhood. Well, it was very trippy, but I think he's doing such an incredible job handling all that, and then handling the multimedia presentation and telling people, yeah, show that videotape, hold that, here's the exhibit. It's absolutely unbelievable. And I think that it's telegraphing to the jury that this is a very intelligent person, that this is not some common criminal going in there to steal a pig, that this is, he glossed over the fact that he's a lawyer. He glossed over the fact that he was a constitutional law professor. So I find that interesting because you don't have to be a lawyer to represent yourself. Do you think there was a strategy behind that, Simone?
Well, I think first of all that he did a lot, which was a great strategy of just, presenting himself as a fellow human being who had a history that involved things that, that made him more compassionate, things that so many of us can relate to, whether it was, how his family got to this country, or, having to, or feeling bullied, or any of these things. I think that was to align himself so that, sometimes people look at vegans and they think, oh, I can't relate to anything that they're saying. They're so weird, they're so different than us. They're so extreme, right? That's what the media has often portrayed us to be. And I think he was just humanizing himself even more so that the jury could see him as a fellow citizen of the world. And he's also been so incredibly impressive to me because he hasn't been intimidated. I mean, the FBI was there, but as animal rights activists, unfortunately, we started to recognize the fact that just by virtue of us being animal rights activists, we are very, very, very much on the radar of the FBI. And we know from documents that were released by Greenpeace and PETA and talked about by the ACLU that the FBI has expanded their definition of domestic terrorism to people that simply do lawful protests or staged disobedience, with an emphasis so many times on the animal rights movement. So, it's intimidating to have the FBI speaking, but he did it so beautifully because when the FBI was up there, they actually, I think, he came across on our side, because he was like, the question was, how many times have you really been brought into a case, which is a burglary case, in essence, and the items that were burglarized, in this case were sentient beings, but they were under $100, and the FBI guy is kind of like, maybe less than 5 times. And the answer was probably, this is the only time, right? So his strategy is beautiful, and he's so impressive, and he's, it's a very emotional thing to talk about animals and suffering, and he has kept his cool. So at the end of this, no matter what the outcome, he should be so proud of himself.
I want to play a confrontation in court where Wayne is trying to cross-examine the manager at Smithfield. And again, it's the objections that stop him in his tracks.
You testified that piglets, I just want to restate your testimony previously, that piglets have value in Smithfield, correct?
Yes, they do. Okay.
Does this include piglets that end up in a dumpster outside?
Again, Your Honor, objection. We've gone over this 3 or 4 times. Sustained.
And piglets that are discarded into dumpsters. Presumably these piglets are not sold for meat, correct?
I think this is the 5th time I've stood and objected to this same question.
Your Honor, I'm just trying to establish...
It's sustained.
Okay.
I don't want you mentioning that again.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm just trying to establish The value of piglets, which is an element of theft.
Sustain the objection.
Your Honor, may I approach?
No. Ask the question.
So there, may I approach? No, ask your question. I personally, again, have never heard, I think it's happened. In fact, Lisa Bloom said it has happened, but I personally have never heard when an attorney for either side says, Your Honor, may I approach? The judge saying no. If you're a juror sitting in the jury box, what do you make of that?
I'm just seeing that he's not allowing the defense to prove their case. I want to know these things. I want to know the so-called value. I want to, if they're prosecuting this case because they've stolen something of value, then I want to know what the value is, even if they're dead. I want to know the practices, and also if they're throwing them away in the trash can, obviously there's no value, unless of course the rendering thing comes up. But again, they're not going to bring that up because the value is so small, even for rendering, that it's probably a few dollars.
And when you say rendering, you're talking about.
So what they do with rendering is they'll take animals that have died on so-called farms, and they send them to a rendering facility where they're ground up and put into the food for the farm animals. So the animals are basically eating themselves. And also, he mentioned one of the witnesses.
Well, I was under the impression that after the mad cow scandal that some of those practices were stopped, but I don't know. I can tell you I'm not an expert in that, so I cannot say one way or another whether that practice is still happening. But we do know that, let's say, dog food, a lot of those practices. Yes. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, continue.
No. Yeah, I was just going to say what you said, that the witness did mention dog food. I was not under the impression that they actually stopped this practice 100%. But if they have, that's a step in the right direction.
Let me just say this. A lot of things that aren't supposed to happen on factory farms is still allegedly purportedly happen. For example, antibiotic resistance. The overwhelming majority of antibiotics are fed to farmed animals because they're kept in such terrible conditions. They die. It also fattens them up. It's supposed to pass through the animal before it's fed to humans. But we know that USDA inspectors in many huge undercover cases like the Hallmark slaughterhouse case are looking the other way. Terrible things are happening. Down cows are being dragged by tractors. They don't see a thing. Okay, see no evil, hear no evil. Mm-hmm. So I don't think anybody can say with certainty what is exactly happening on factory farms. That's why a lot of animal rights organizations, sure, we'd like to see them all shut down. But if that's more like a wish at this point. But certainly, I think having cameras inside all factory farms and slaughterhouses that everybody from the public can see would be the first step in ensuring something like this doesn't happen. Again, we invite Smithfield on anytime, by the way, to comment. We'd love to dialogue with you. There are reports that you said several years ago that you were phasing out pig gestation crates. And Wayne says that's one of the reasons they went in there, because they have obviously not phased out pig gestation crates. So, yes, your thoughts on that, Simone?
Well, again, so much of the information that we have to obtain to find out exactly what is being adhered to, what is actually going on in a slaughterhouse or a factory farm or a feedlot has to be done undercover. And that is why groups like DXE and all the other groups that actually, Mercy for Animals, PETA, ones that actually go undercover are so important to the movement, and honestly to the state of the planet and to humans just in general, because people have a right to know what goes on in these facilities that they are in essence paying to do these things, right? When somebody buys a hamburger, as against it as we might be, shouldn't they have a right to see how that hamburger was killed, how that cow was treated, what the conditions of that cow look like, or this pig or the chicken or whatever it is? This is something that should be completely transparent, and it is probably the most hidden thing certainly in food, but in almost anything, which is why the FBI puts so much pressure on animal rights activists to sort of, step back and, lay low and, don't protest, don't, go and get yourself arrested for civil disobedience, because we will come down very hard on you. It appears that the government in almost all aspects are in some ways taking the role of being security guards for the animal agriculture industry. Why is that? That is terrifying, because when people find out about how their meat became meat in the slogan of "meat your meat," right? Many times that's what makes them go vegan. They say, this is disgusting. This is inhumane. Look at the pollution. Look at what it's doing to the environment. Look at how unsanitary it is. They're grossed out. They're disgusted. They're horrified. And it is why we need to continue on with these undercover investigations, which is really the only eye that we have inside of these houses of horror.
And let's talk about that. There's simultaneously, as Wayne Hsiung mentioned in one of his post-court appearances, an effort to create ag gag laws that criminalize videotaping anything inside a farm. Quite often, it's whistleblowers, people who work in the farm, who contact animal organizations like PETA, Animal Outlook, and DXC and others and say, I can't take it anymore. What's happening here is just keeping me up at night. It's so awful. And then thanks to that tip, an undercover investigation proceeds. But the truth is, it's system-wide. There has, to my knowledge, almost never been an undercover investigation where any of these groups go undercover at a factory farm or a slaughterhouse where everything is just wonderful, like it's in some movie and the animals are happy and moving around. No, it's always a hellhole horror show, because how do you produce 80 billion land animals every year and kill them? 80 billion, 80 billion. And so there's no nice way to kill one animal who doesn't want to die, much less 80 billion of them every year. So if this upsets you, and you're still eating animals, this is a good time to stop. Have a moment of clarity. And that's what we do at Unchained TV. We've only got a couple of seconds left. I want to tell you about our global streaming network, which Simone Reyes is the star of a reality show called Pig Little Lies, which actually you're just a cast member. The stars are the pigs. It's the world's first reality show starring a family of pigs. You can watch it on Unchained TV. We are a global streaming network. You can get it online by going to UnchainedTV.com, and you can also get it on your phone. Just go to your phone and just put in the words Unchained TV. It's actually one word, Unchained TV, and it comes up. You can watch Pig Little Lies, the fantastic reality series. And I'll just give you an example. There it is right there in the corner, Unchained TV. And it opens right up. And I can even show you the actual video of Pig Little Lies right there. I didn't think, it didn't occur to me till you were on. And I saw that, wow, here we are watching the reality show where there's Simone and I.
Oh, is that your phone? Hold on. There's two pigs, a bonded pair, at a high kill shelter. They have basically until tonight. Whatever it takes, we're going to get those pigs out. I don't have any place to put pigs. I have pigs all over town. There's nobody else who can step up for this?
All right, if you want to see the rest, you're going to have to go to Unchained TV. We are a free global streaming network. It's a 5-part series. It's gotten a lot of great press. And before you think, oh, she's gone off on some unrelated tangent, no, this was our way of getting people in the tent because people demean pigs so much. You bleep pig, that man's a pig, that, you know, that we've demonized pigs in our society. And that's why the prosecutor said, and they raise pigs, right? Like, it's not important. These are just pigs. Why should you care? So we can't just lecture people. We have to get them in the tent. Wayne's brilliant strategy. He's getting people in the tent by literally risking 11 years in prison. Simone and I, and you've been involved in it too as well, catering our launch party. We do it a little differently. We did a reality series called Pig Little Lies, which you can watch on Unchained TV for free. And it really just shows that pigs are highly emotional. I learned, even shooting it, how emotional these pigs are. Mama Beatrice, her intense emotions when she had to be taken to the vet or taken somewhere and leave her babies behind. It was like you could see, and her understanding of Cindy talking to her and saying, no, don't worry, Beatrice, we're going to bring you home. We're going to bring you home. And even though she didn't speak English, she understood the tone. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's really at the heart of this. These are not just objects. These are thinking, feeling, highly intelligent animals, the 5th most intelligent species on the planet. Simone.
Studies that were not conducted by animal rights activists or bleeding heart animal lovers. Scientists who were curious did studies that you can look up, documented studies that show that pigs are smarter than your beloved dog that many people would take a bullet for. Many people would sell their house to pay a veterinarian bill to save their life of their dog. Pigs are smarter. Pigs are also smarter than toddlers. If you can actually think about what that means for a pig who has given birth in a slaughterhouse, in a feedlot that has only known pain and suffering, if you can imagine what those emotions do to this pig and how they are so deserving, as are all animals that have a central nervous system, to be free of that kind of torture. Nobody would ever be eating a hot dog or a hamburger or a chicken nugget again. But we are not shown that as children. We have books, right, that are read to us and that we learn to read on about animals and their emotions. And then somewhere along the line, we are indoctrinated with the idea that they're only here to serve us. And once you actually go through the back door of what this world really means to animals by seeing these undercover investigations, you can never unsee what you see. And that is the primary reason why people go vegan, is seeing these images, and why they stay vegan. There's many vegans that go vegan for the planet and many that go vegan for their own health, and that's wonderful. But they have also showed by polls that vegans who stay vegan for life are the ones that have made the connection of seeing that animals are sentient beings and have exactly the same level of emotions as your cat or your dog or your child.
Well, Deb Thompson says, I'm surprised that this judge hasn't ordered Wayne bound and gagged. Interesting observation. On that note, we're going to leave it, but I want to let you know, everybody watching, you know, we start at 11 a.m. Pacific, which is noon Mountain Time. The trial is happening in Utah. That's Mountain Time. So it's around the time that the court takes a break, and it's 2 p.m. Eastern. And you just go here to this Facebook page that you're watching it from, or you can go to UnchainedTV.com. We are playing it on our homepage. And then you can also go into our app, which As you just found out, you can get right on your phone for free. It takes 10 seconds to download the words Unchained TV in your app store and hit it. And you have hundreds of videos. We're also going to be starting. This is our first foray into live coverage, but my goal is to become the vegan CNN, to have shows, news shows that cover what's not being covered. And so you can tune in the morning and you can hear a news show that's going to talk about climate change and animal agriculture's impact on climate change and animals agriculture's impact on poor diet in America and diminishing longevity. And we're going to have prominent attorneys. We're going to have celebrities. We're going to have a lot of people with their own shows. So download it now. If you have videos, if anybody from the vegan animal rights community is watching that has videos that they'd like to see streamed, yes, we're doing a lot of original content, but we're also aggregating the best cooking shows, the best documentaries, talk shows, videos of festivals, events, lectures. So contact us, info@UnchainedTV.com, info@UnchainedTV.com. For example, we're going to the Animal Rights Conference at DC coming up on the 20th through 23rd. I am planning, I always say planning because, you know, the internet, I'm not in control of the internet, planning to go live and interviewing live some of the big change makers and leaders in our movement from my booth that Unchained TV has at that Animal Rights Conference. So please come back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Pacific, noon Mountain, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a fabulous panel, and we're going to play all the clips that we can get in of Wayne defending himself, testifying, asking and answering his own questions. See you next time. Thank you, incredible panel, for being here. Woo!